The doors were closed. No announcement followed. No record was kept. By morning, Rome continued as if nothing had happened. But what unfolded behind those walls would later be remembered as one of the darkest scandals ever linked to a pope. Not because it was violent, not because it was public, but because Rome chose silence and protected it for years. This is not a story about belief. It is a story about power without limits, about women trapped inside authority, and about how one pope turned secrecy into policy. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Europe eventually stopped trusting Rome, not after a single act, but after a pattern no one could ignore. What makes this story disturbing is not rumor, but record. Contemporary accounts from across Europe describe a period when the papal court became infamous for private behavior so troubling that even political allies refused to defend it openly. Not because the claims were exaggerated, but because acknowledging them threatened the authority of the church itself. That is where this story truly begins. What made this pope infamous was not one mistake. It was three connected scandals unfolding at the same time, feeding into one another, protected by the same system, and strengthened by silence. The first scandal was about power. By this point in history, the papacy was no longer just a spiritual office. It was one of the most powerful political positions in Europe. The pope's approval could legitimize kings. His disapproval could destroy reputations overnight. His favor could elevate families for generations, while his silence could quietly erase them. And during this period, that power stopped being restrained. Appointments were no longer about faith or competence. They became tools of loyalty. Family members advanced quickly. Allies were rewarded with protection. Critics vanished quietly from influence. Opposition didn't disappear because everyone agreed. It disappeared because resistance carried consequences. Across Europe, observers began to whisper that the papacy no longer felt like a moral authority, but like a private court built around one man. Power didn't need to explain itself. It didn't need to justify decisions. It simply existed. And when power goes unchallenged long enough, it stops answering to morality. It begins answering only to itself. The second scandal is the most uncomfortable and the most important because it involved women, not in public, not through violence, but through exploitation hidden inside hierarchy. Women connected to the papal court lived within a system where refusal carried consequences and compliance offered protection. Advancement, security, and reputation were often tied to obedience inside an environment no one could challenge. This was not consent. It was coercion, shaped by authority. Some women depended on church protection for survival. Others were tied to powerful families whose fortunes rose and fell with papal favor. All were trapped inside a structure where the Pope's influence could determine their future, and where speaking openly was not an option. What shocked contemporaries was not only the behavior, it was how quickly it became normalized. Conduct that should have ended careers instead dissolved into silence. Responsibility moved upward, away from accountability. Those with the least power bore the greatest risk, while those at the center remained untouched. This was not chaos, it was control. Access signaled favor, absence signaled punishment, and once boundaries blurred, they disappeared entirely. The third scandal was the most dangerous of all, because it didn't involve actions. It involved silence. Records disappeared. Complaints were ignored. Criticism was reframed as political hostility. Those who questioned authority were labeled enemies of the church rather than defenders of its principles. The system did not correct itself. It defended itself. Those who knew the truth faced a choice: expose power or survive it. Most chose survival, not because they agreed, but because resistance carried consequences. This is how private exploitation became a public crisis of trust. Not through one event, but through repetition, protection, and denial. None of this happened in the open. It happened at night, behind closed doors, inside rooms where memory was discouraged and silence was assumed. What later historians would find most disturbing wasn't only what happened, but how routine it became. The obvious question is why no one stopped it. The answer is uncomfortable. Because many benefited. Families gained influence. Officials gained security. Allies gained protection. To speak out was to risk exile, disgrace, or ruin. And there was another powerful force at work: control of narrative. Documents could be edited, stories softened, accusations reframed. What could not be erased was delayed, and delay became policy. For a time, Rome succeeded, but Europe was watching. Whispers became letters. Letters became conversations. Conversations crossed borders. Foreign courts began to speak cautiously. Diplomats expressed concern. Rival powers recognized weakness where authority once stood unquestioned. The image of the church, carefully constructed over centuries, began to fracture. This was no longer a private matter. It became a political liability. Europe did not react with outrage alone. It reacted with doubt, and doubt is more dangerous to authority than anger. Rome responded the only way it knew how. Damage control replaced accountability. Records were revised. Stories were softened. Attention was redirected. Achievements were emphasized. Failures minimized. Exploitation reframed as exaggeration or attack. For a time it worked. Generations passed with only fragments of the truth surviving, often dismissed as rumor or political hostility. But fragments endure, and history has a way of resurfacing what power tries to bury. What remains is not simply the story of one pope. It is a warning about what happens when authority exists without limits, when institutions protect power instead of people, when silence becomes policy. Rome endured, the church survived, but trust did not. Not because of scandal alone, but because of what the scandal revealed. That even the most powerful institutions become dangerous when accountability disappears. And that history, no matter how carefully buried, always finds a way to surface.